Standard 6I is comparing the Progressive Era and the New Deal. Progressive Era is an umbrella label for a wide range of economic, political, social, and moral reforms. This included efforts to outlaw the sale of alcohol, regulate child labor in sweatshops, scientifically manage natural resources, ensure pure and wholesome water and milk, Americanize immigrants or restrict immigration altogether, and bust or regulate trusts. Progressive reformers sought to eliminate corruption in government, regulate business practices, address health hazards, and improve working conditions. They also fought to give the public more direct control over government through direct primaries to nominate candidates for public office, direct election of senators, the initiative, referendum, and recall, and women's suffrage. At the beginning of the 20th century, muckraking journalists were calling attention to the exploitation of child labor, corruption in city governments, the horror of lynching, and the ruthless business practices employed by businessmen like John D. Rockefeller. The early 20th century was an era of business expansion and progressive reform in the United States. The progressive, as they called themselves, worked to make American society a better and safer place in which to live. They tried to make big business more responsible through regulations of various kinds. They worked to clean up corrupt city governments, to improve working conditions in factories, and to better living conditions for those who lived in slum areas, a large number of whom who were recent immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. Many progressives were also concerned with the environment and conservation of resources. This generation of Americans also hoped to make the world a more democratic place. At home, this meant expanding the right to vote to women and a number of election reforms such as the recall, referendum, and direct election of senators. New Deal. After the Great Depression, a series of experimental projects and programs were put in place, known as the New Deal. It aimed at restoring dignity and prosperity to many Americans. On March 4, 1933, at the height of the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt delivered his first inaugural address before 100,000 people on Washington's Capitol Plaza. First of all, he said, "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself." The next day, the new president declared a 4-day bank holiday to stop people from withdrawing their money from shaky banks. On March 9th, Congress passed Roosevelt's Emergency Banking Act, which reorganized the banks and closed the ones that were insolvent. In his first fireside chat 3 days later, the president urged Americans to put their savings back in the banks, and by the end of the month, almost 3/4 of them had reopened. Despite the best efforts of President Roosevelt and his cabinet, however, the Great Depression continued. The nation's economy continued to wheeze, unemployment persisted, and people grew angrier and more desperate. So in the spring of 1935, Roosevelt launched a second, more aggressive series of federal programs, some called the Second New Deal.